I always thought my brother was just joking. He'd throw those teasing remarks, little comments I brushed off thinking they meant nothing. But that night, the way he looked at me, the way his voice dropped when he spoke, it changed everything. I thought I knew. I didn't plan for my heart to race, for my world to shift, for my feelings to get tangled in ways I never imagined. And once the truth slipped between us, there was no going back. The rain had been falling for hours, drumming against the windows like an impatient hand tapping to be let in. I sat on the couch scrolling through my phone, half listening to the faint sound of my brother Ryan humming in the kitchen. We weren't close in the typical tell each other everything kind of way. He was a year older, sharper in his humor, always finding ways to make me roll my eyes. Still, there was something about his presence that felt grounding. No matter how much we argued, he had this strange ability to make me feel safe. That night he called from the kitchen. "Hey, you want tea?" I didn't look up from my phone. "Only if you're making it." "Wow," he said, voice dripping with sarcasm. "Such gratitude. I'll remember this when I'm famous and you're begging for a signed photo." I laughed, shaking my head. "You can't even remember to put the milk back in the fridge." "I get distracted," he replied, appearing in the doorway with 2 steaming mugs. He handed me one, his fingers brushing mine just long enough for me to notice. He dropped onto the couch beside me, his knee almost touching mine. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the rain and the faint creak of the old house. Then, out of nowhere, he said, "You know, if we weren't brothers, I think we'd be good together." I froze. The words hung there as casual as if he'd asked me to pass the remote. I laughed it off, shoving his shoulder lightly. "Yeah, sure. And if I were a billionaire, I'd buy you an island." But he didn't laugh. He just looked at me with this unreadable expression, the corner of his mouth twitching like he was holding something back. "You think I'm kidding?" he murmured. I blinked at him, unsure how to respond. The air between us shifted, heavier, more charged. My chest tightened. I told myself it was just another one of his stupid jokes, the kind designed to catch me off guard. But part of me, some foolish, curious part, filed those words away like they meant something. Later that night, I found myself replaying it in my head. The way he'd said it, the fact that he hadn't laughed after. I stood at my bedroom window, watching the rain blur the streetlights, wondering why my heart was still beating a little too fast. Ryan and I had always teased each other, but this was different. This wasn't the kind of sibling banter you just shrug off. And maybe it was the way I caught him looking at me earlier, eyes lingering a fraction too long. I told myself I was overthinking. I tried to sleep, but I dreamed about him. His voice, the closeness of his arm brushing mine, the way his lips had curved around those impossible words. The next morning, the rain had stopped, leaving the air damp and cool. Ryan was already in the kitchen flipping pancakes. He looked up as I walked in. "Morning," he said, smiling like nothing was unusual. "Morning," I replied, searching his face for something. He pushed a plate toward me. "Made extra for you." "Since when are you this nice?" I asked, sitting down. He smirked. "Since I realized you might finally appreciate me." I tried to act normal, but the way he leaned on the counter watching me eat made my pulse skip. I forced myself to change the subject. "So you working today?" "Nah, day off." He sipped his coffee, eyes still on me. "We should do something like what?" He shrugged. "Doesn't matter as long as it's with you." I nearly choked on my pancake. I couldn't tell if he was teasing or if this was something else entirely. Every time I thought I had him figured out, he'd say something that knocked the balance out from under me. We ended up taking a drive along the coast that afternoon. The sun was breaking through the clouds, scattering golden light across the water. Ryan had the windows down, one hand on the wheel, the other drumming against the door in rhythm with the music. I kept stealing glances at him, catching the way. His jaw tightened when the wind whipped his hair into his eyes. The way he bit his lip when he concentrated on the road. I'd never noticed those things before. Or maybe I had, but I hadn't let myself notice. When we stopped at a lookout point, I leaned against the hood of the car, staring out at the ocean. "It's kind of peaceful," he said. "Makes you think about the stuff that matters." I stood beside him, the salty breeze tugging at me jacket. "Like what?" He glanced at me, eyes sharp but soft at the same time. "Like how sometimes the thing you want most is right in front of you, but you're too scared to admit it." My heart stuttered. "Ryan." I started, but he shook his head, pushing off the hood. "Come on," he said, walking back to the driver's side. "We'll be late for dinner." I followed, my mind spinning. Whatever this was, whatever strange magnetic thing had started between us, it wasn't just in my head. I could feel it, and I knew deep down that something was going to happen, something that would change everything. Dinner that evening was quieter than usual. Ryan and I sat across from each other, plates between us, the sound-off forks scraping against ceramic, filling the space. Every time I looked up, I caught him watching me, not in that casual, "Hey, we're family" way, but in a way that made my stomach twist. After a while, I couldn't take it anymore. "What's with you?" I asked, setting down my fork. He raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean? You keep staring at me." Asmerk tugged at his lips. "Maybe I like looking at you." I rolled my eyes, but my face grew hot. "You're impossible." He leaned forward slightly, elbows on the table, voice low. "And maybe you like it when I do." The words hit me harder than they should have. I laughed too quickly, too nervously, and stood up to take my plate to the sink. "I'm going to bed early," I said, needing an escape. "Sure," he said, leaning back in his chair. But I could feel his gaze following me all the way down the hall. That night, I couldn't sleep. The house was too quiet, the shadows too thick. I kept thinking about the way his eyes had glinted across the dinner table, the way his voice seemed to brush against my skin. Around midnight, I heard the faint creak of floorboards outside my room. My door was half open, and through the gap, I saw Ryan's silhouette. He knocked lightly. "You still up?" I hesitated. "Yeah." He stepped in, hands in his pockets. "Couldn't sleep. Thought maybe we could talk." I sat up, pulling the blanket over my lap. "Talk about what?" He closed the door behind him and sat on the edge of my bed. The mattress dipped under his weight, bringing him closer than I was prepared for. "I just feel like there's stuff between us that we don't say," he said softly. "Like maybe we've both been pretending not to notice it." My pulse thundered in my ears. "Ryan," he turned toward me, eyes steady. "You're the only person who really gets me. And lately I can't stop thinking about you." I swallowed hard. My instinct was topple away, but instead I found myself holding his gaze. The air between us felt electric, humming with something we shouldn't be feeling but couldn't seem to avoid. "You can't just say things like that," I whispered. "Why not?" His voice was barely above a breath. "It's true." Before I could answer, his hand brushed mine. It was small, barely a touch, but it sent a shock through me. I wanted to move. I wanted to tell him this was wrong. But a part of me, some dangerous hidden part, wanted to lean into it. We sat there, caught in the tension, until I finally managed to say, "You should go." For a moment I thought he wouldn't, but then he stood slowly, lingering by the door. "I'm not trying to mess things up," he said. "I just can't keep pretending." He left without another word, leaving me staring at the door long after it closed. The next day I tried to act normal. We went through the motions. Coffee in the kitchen, half-hearted jokes, the usual sibling banter, but underneath it all, there was a crack in the foundation. Every glance, every casual touch felt loaded. By afternoon, he suggested we go hiking. "It'll clear our heads," he said. "Sure," I replied, though I doubted it would clear anything. The trail was quiet except for the crunch of leaves under our boots. The forest was damp from the recent rain, sunlight streaming through the trees in thin golden threads. We didn't talk much, but every so often I'd feel him watching me when he thought I wasn't looking. At one point we stopped by a small stream. I crouched down to skim his hand across the water. "You ever think about how easy it would be to just start over somewhere else? No rules, no expectations." I crossed my arms, studying him. "You mean run away?" "Not run," he said, glancing up at me. "Just choose something different. Someone different." The way he said it made my breath catch. There it was again. That unspoken implication, that edge we were both skirting. By the time we made it back to the car, the sun was dipping low, painting the sky in streaks of orange and violet. He drove us home in silence, the tension between us thick enough to touch. That night I avoided him. I stayed in my room, headphones in, pretending to be absorbed in music. But around 11, there was another knock on my door. "Come in," I said reluctantly. Ryan stepped inside, leaning against the frame. "I just don't want you to hate me," he said. I set my headphones aside. "I don't hate you." "Good," he said, moving closer. "Because I don't think I can stop how I feel." Fear seemed to shrink around us. He sat down again, just like the night before. But this time, his knee brushed mine. Neither of us moved away. "You don't have to say anything," he murmured. "I just needed you to know." And I realized in that moment that I wasn't just afraid of what he felt. I was afraid of the part of me that didn't want him to stop. The following days blurred together, but the tension didn't fade. It only grew heavier. Ryan and I still went through the motions. Morning coffee, quick meals, casual conversations. But underneath, there was this constant quiet pull between us. Sometimes I'd catch him watching me like he was memorizing the shape of my face. Other times, I'd notice how his voice softened when it was just the two of us. And each time my chest tightened a little more. It was Friday night when the crack finally widened. Rain had returned, tapping against the windows in a soft rhythm. I was curled on the couch with a blanket, half watching an old movie. Ryan came in from the kitchen, 2 mugs in hand. "Hot chocolate," he said, handing one to me. "Thought you could use it." "Thanks," he murmured, taking a sip. The warmth was comforting, but not enough to steady the flutter in my chest. He sat next to me close enough that our knees touched under the blanket. I told myself to focus on the TV, but the movie blurred. All I could feel was the heat of him next to me. "You've been avoiding me," he said suddenly. I blinked. "No, I haven't." He gave me a look that said he didn't believe me. "You have, and I think I know why." I set my mug down slowly. "Ryan." He turned toward me, his expression serious. "I meant what I said the other night. I can't stop thinking about you, and I don't think you can either." My heart thudded in my chest. "This is crazy," I whispered. "Maybe it is," he said, leaning just slightly closer. "But it's real." I searched his face for some sign he was joking, but there was none. His gaze was steady, intense, and it made it impossible to breathe evenly. "I don't know what you want me to say," I managed. "Say you don't feel the same," he challenged, "and I'll drop it." The problem was I couldn't. The truth lodged in my throat, burning. Instead, I stood up, pacing toward the window. "We can't do this," I said, though my voice lacked conviction. "Why not?" he asked, following me but keeping a few steps back. "Because we're not supposed to. People would forget people," he cut in, voice firm. "What about you? What do you want?" The rain outside strayed blurring into a smear of light and shadow. I turned to face him, and the look in his eyes, hopeful, raw, vulnerable, was enough to make my chest ache. I didn't answer. Not with words, but something in me shifted. I moved closer and he didn't back away. When our shoulders brushed, I felt his breath hitch. We stood there caught in thimblement until his hand found mine. His touch was warm, steady, grounding, and dangerous. "You don't have to decide anything tonight," he said quietly. "I just need you to know I'm here no matter what." For a moment, all I could hear was the rain and the sound of my own heartbeat. And in that stillness, I realized how much I'd been lying to myself. I did want him. I'd been wanting him for longer than I'd admitted. We ended up back on the couch, side by side, neither of us watching the movie. At some point, I leaned against him. His arm went around me almost instinctively, pulling me closer. It was the safest I'd felt in a long time, and the most dangerous. The hours slipped by. We didn't talk much, just sat there in quiet warmth. But when the movie credits rolled and I finally stood to go tubed, Ryan caught my wrist gently. "Stay," he said. Just one word, but it carried so much weight. I hesitated, heart pounding, then sat back down. The rest of the night was just stillness, a shared silence that felt more intimate than any words could have. Later, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling, knowing something had changed. We hadn't crossed the line entirely, but we'd stepped so close to it. There was no going back. And deep down, I knew the next time we found ourselves alone, that line wouldn't hold. The weekend came with an unusual stillness in the air. Wasn't just the quiet streets outside or the muted winter sunlight. It was the way Ryan and I kept circling each other in the house, speaking in low voices, moving slower than usual, like neither of us wanted to disturb whatever fragile thread was holding us together. That night he asked if I wanted to watch something again. It was almost becoming a ritual. 2 mugs, 1 blanket, and that heavy unspoken something between us. But this time, instead of a movie, he suggested we just put on some music. Less distraction, he said with a faint smile. We sat on the couch, a soft acoustic playlist filling the space between us. The lights were low, the only glow coming from the lamp in the corner. I could feel his warmth beside him, could sense every shift in his breathing. "Do you remember when we were younger?" he began. "And you used to sneak into my room when there was a storm?" He nodded slowly. "Yeah, I couldn't sleep when it thundered." He chuckled softly. "You'd just sit there half asleep and I'd end up telling you some ridiculous story until you calmed down." I smiled faintly. "I guess I just felt safe with you." His expression changed to that softer, almost pained. "That hasn't changed for me," he said. "If anything, it's stronger now." Something in his voice made my chest tighten. I shifted slightly to face him, Ryan. But before I could say more, he leaned in just enough for our foreheads to nearly touch. His eyes searched mine as if he was asking a question without speaking it. I could have pulled away. I should have, but I didn't. It was a slow, magnetic pull, the kind where every second feels longer than it should. His hand brushed against my knee, resting there gently, and the warmth of it sent a ripple through me. "You know we can't go back after this," he murmured. "I know," I breathed. The space between us vanished, not in anguish, but in the quiet surrender of 2 people who had been holding back for too long. Our foreheads touched, and Wes stayed like that, the music soft around us, the air thick with everything we hadn't said. When his hand found mine, I didn't resist. When his thumb brushed the side of my wrist, my pulse jumped beneath his touch. We weren't doing anything that would break any rule we couldn't come back from. But the feeling, it was more intimate than anything I'd ever experienced. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then he whispered, "Tell me I'm not the only one feeling this." I met his gaze, and it was impossible to lie. "You're not." That was it. That was the moment the dam broke. Not in some dramatic physical way, but in the quiet acknowledgement that whatever this was, it was real. We stayed close like that until the music ended, just looking at each other in the dim light. His thumb kept tracing slow circles over my hand, grounding me in a way I didn't know and needed. When I finally stood to head tubbed, he didn't let go immediately. "Tomorrow," he said softly. "Let's not pretend anymore." And for the first time, I didn't answer with doubt. I just nodded. That night, lying in bed, I replayed it all over and over. The closeness, the way he'd looked at me, the way I'd stopped fighting the pull. "Tomorrow," he had said. "Tomorrow everything might change." Morning came quietly. No storm, no wind, just a soft wash of pale sunlight spilling through my blinds. I lay there for a long time, staring at the ceiling, remembering Ryan's voice from the night before. "Tomorrow, let's not pretend anymore." The words felt heavy in my chest, but not in a bad way. More like the weight of something I'd been carrying for years without realizing it. I found him in the kitchen already dressed, pouring coffee. He looked up when I walked in, and there it was. That same look, open, unashamed. "Morning," he said. "Morning," I replied, my voice quieter than I meant it to be. We stood there for a moment, just looking at each other, and then he slid a mug toward me and leaned against the counter, his eyes never leaving mine. "You remember what I said last night?" I nodded. "Yeah, I meant it. I don't want to keep pretending I don't feel what I feel when I'm around you." I gripped the mug, my fingers warming against the ceramic. "Ryan, this isn't simple." "I know it's not," he said. "But I also know I've never been this sure about anything in my life." We ended up taking our coffees to the back porch. The morning air was crisp, carrying the smell of wet earth from the rain. He sat beside me, elbows resting on his knees. "You don't have to say yes to this," he murmured. "You don't have to want the same thing I do. But I can't go back to acting like you're just my brother. Not when I—" He trailed off, shaking his head, almost laughing at himself. "Not when I feel like this." I stared out of the yard, the fence, the sunlight catching in the leaves. I'd spent so long telling myself that this was a line that couldn't be crossed. But the truth was I'd already crossed it. We both had. When I finally looked back at him, I saw the nerves in his eyes, the way his hand curled against his knee, like he was holding himself still. "I don't want to pretend either," I said softly. The relief that flashed across his face was instant, but he didn't rush toward me, didn't make it dramatic. He just smiled, small, genuine, and leaned closer, his shoulder brushing mine. We stayed like that for a long time, not needing to fill the silence. The world outside felt distant, like it couldn't touch us here. Eventually, he laughed under his breath. "You know this changes everything, right?" "Yeah," I said. "I think I'm okay with that." The rest of the day felt lighter somehow. We didn't have to keep sidestepping the truth, didn't have to guard every word or glance. There was still an unspoken agreement to move carefully, to figure out how to handle what this meant. But the air between us wasn't tense anymore. It was warm. That evening, we drove out to the same coastal lookout we'd visited days before. The ocean stretched out endlessly, the sun dipping low, painting the waves in streaks of gold. "I wanted to bring you here again," he said, "because that day I almost told you then." I smiled faintly. "Guess I would have been a mess if you had." "Maybe," he said, looking out at the horizon. "But I don't regret waiting. Now feels right." We didn't talk much after that, just stood side by side, watching the sun disappear into the sea. At some point his hand found mine again, and this time I didn't hesitate. It wasn't about crossing lines anymore. It was about admitting that what we had was real, complicated, yes, but ours. When we finally headed back to the car, I glanced at him and caught that same quiet smile, the one that said he'd been waiting for this for a long time. That night, before we went to bed, he paused in the hallway. "Hey," he said softly. "Yeah, I'm glad you're mine," he said, "even if the world never understands it." And for the first time, I didn't feel the need to hide my answer. I'm glad too. I used to think there were rules you couldn't break, lines you couldn't cross. But sometimes life gives you something you can't explain, something that defies reason but makes perfect sense in your heart. I thought my brother was just joking when he said those words. I didn't realize he was opening the door to a truth we'd both been holding inside. And once we stepped through, I knew I never wanted to go.